Some great sci-fi novels just don't have any luck when it comes to film adaptation. William Gibson's Neuromancer, Philip K. Dick's Ubik, Arthur C. Clarke's Rendezvous with Rama. I could go on. But there's one classic that predates them all, and for 6 decades and counting, it seems to have always remained the furthest from actually being filmed. Alfred Bester's 1956 masterpiece, The Stars, My Destination. If you wanted to make a list of the most important and influential science fiction authors, Alfred Bester would probably deserve a spot at least in the top 10. His work was popular, critically acclaimed, and stylistically groundbreaking. Multiple generations of sci-fi authors have cited him as a creative inspiration, including Joe Haldeman, William Gibson, and Neil Gaiman. And yet, in spite of the immense respect bestowed upon him within his own field, Bester still doesn't appear to be very well known outside of science fiction fan circles. There are a few reasons for this. One is that his output was very sporadic. He didn't publish many novels within his lifetime, and the quality of his work proved inconsistent as he grew older. But the biggest contributing factor might be the fact that neither of his greatest books have ever been adapted into movies. Bester started his career as a pulp writer. He wrote short stories for science fiction magazines, scripts for episodic television and radio shows, and contributed storylines to Golden Age comics like Superman and Green Lantern. His first novel, The Demolished Man, published in 1953, became an instant classic, winning the first ever Hugo Award. The ingenious story followed a man who plots to kill a business competitor in a future society where telepathic abilities have made all crime a virtual impossibility. Bester's writing was flamboyant and gripping. He told his story with breathless energy and played with format to create unique effects. Instead of focusing on scientific plausibility, Bester's pulp sensibility emphasized idea, theme, and style. His work became a modern genre milestone. In 1956, he published Tiger, Tiger, later retitled The Stars, My Destination, and his reputation amongst sci-fi fans was forever secured. Essentially a retelling of Alexandre Dumas' The Count of Monte Cristo, the book was about an uneducated, unmotivated spaceship crewman named Gully Foyle, who was driven to embark on a violent and single-minded quest for vengeance after being marooned in space. Human teleportation, referred to as jaunting, has become the standard mode of travel, but it has limits. No one can jaunt more than 1,000 miles, and jaunting through the vacuum of space is impossible. Reaching into his previously untapped potential for intelligence and ingenuity, Foyle survives, gets his face tattooed in a Maori style, and proceeds to carve a path of destruction across the galaxy, determined to wreak havoc on the people who abandoned him. His plans for revenge are complicated by an impending interplanetary war and a corporate conspiracy involving a new material called pyre, so Foyle is forced to transform himself into a cunning and sophisticated member of high society. As he pushes himself further and further, he begins to unlock his true potential as a human being. Foyle begins the story as an amoral, thoughtless, and almost animalistic force of nature. Bester goes shockingly far in portraying Foyle's brutality, at one point having him rather gratuitously assault a woman. From these depths of depravity, Foyle gradually evolves into a moral being, conflicted about his own need for revenge. By the book's end, he is taking humanity's first step into a form of higher consciousness. The Stars, My Destination, at the time of its publication, was not as lauded as The Demolished Man, but over the years it's become just as beloved. Bester's stylistic innovations are as astonishing today as they were in 1956. In perhaps the most memorable passage, he uses the formatting of the text itself to simulate the effects of synesthesia, a phenomenon where the body's senses become scrambled and start to swap places. After writing 2 of the genre's most influential books, Bester, incredibly, started to drift away from science fiction. He spent the better part of the next 2 decades writing travel pieces for magazines and scripts for television. In all that time, he published only a few science fiction short stories. He wouldn't write another novel until the early 70s. His later work was not met with the same acclaim. Failing eyesight and deteriorating health prevented him from ever making a full comeback. Bester's writing career basically came to a premature end in 1981, and he died 6 years later in 1987. There doesn't appear to have been many serious efforts to adapt The Star Is My Destination within Bester's lifetime. John Carpenter famously worked on a potential adaptation for some time in the late 70s, but it's unclear how far it actually got. Carpenter did mention the book as his dream project in a tweet posted in 2011. Likely there were some other attempts, but if anybody else was pursuing the project in the 50s, 60s, or 70s, they didn't show up in any of the information I could find. The first significant attempt firmly on record appears to date from around 1988, the year after Bester's death. According to David Hughes's The Greatest Sci-Fi Movies Never Made, the rights to the novel somehow wound up in the possession of an unnamed individual described as a mysterious millionaire living in Hawaii. Whoever this mystery person was, his name apparently remains a secret. Stephen E. D'Souza, screenwriter of action hits like Commando, Die Hard, and The Running Man, was contacted by this person in the late 80s to script an adaptation. This whole area of the project's history is very weird and shady, so bear with me. D'Souza is extensively interviewed in Hughes's book, and almost all of this particular information comes from his recollections. Basically, he remembers a man wearing shorts and a Hawaiian shirt walking into his office at Warner Brothers one day and talking to him about the book. This man apparently wasn't a producer, he didn't appear to be involved in the film industry, and he wouldn't actually say what he did for a living. For whatever reason, he happened to own the rights to the book, and he wanted D'Souza to write a screenplay. D'Souza was a big fan of the book, so he decided to take this man up on his offer. Shortly afterward, things started to get a little confusing. D'Souza was informed that a screenplay already existed, apparently written by a friend of the Hawaiian mystery man. D'Souza read it, and claimed it was extremely poor in quality. He says there were problems with structure, characterization, even grammar, and singles out an Obi-Wan Kenobi-esque mentor character whose main function was apparently to provide all the story's exposition as a particularly clumsy addition. Later, D'Souza found out this script was allegedly written by the mystery man himself. As they negotiated what was now a rewrite of this existing screenplay, the two reached an impasse. The mystery man wanted final approval over the script, while D'Souza wanted the freedom to create his own interpretation. Understandably vexed by the whole situation, D'Souza never signed a contract, and the deal sort of fizzled out. A few years later, the project came back to him through producer Joel Silver. Silver had already produced several of D'Souza's scripts, including the massively successful Die Hard movies. He told the writer that Richard Gere, star of the recent hit Pretty Woman, was now controlling the property. D'Souza met with Gere and they discussed the project in detail, including how to best establish the mechanics of jaunting and other necessary bits of exposition involving the book's highly detailed world that were proving tricky to incorporate into the flow of a movie plotline. At the end of the meeting, Gere revealed that he wasn't actually the one who owned the rights. It was a guy from Hawaii. The same guy who'd met with D'Souza. The whole predicament basically turned into a higher stakes repeat of the previous encounter. This time there was a big name actor involved, a major producer, and a new screenplay that had been written sometime in the interim by an unknown writer. D'Souza claims that this screenplay was an improvement over the last one, but in his opinion, it was still in dire need of a comprehensive rewrite. Once again, the mystery man refused to allow any unapproved tinkering with the script, and the project fizzled out for a second time. Sometime in the mid-90s, the man from Hawaii appears to have passed away, or else simply lost ownership of the property. This is where events start to become a little more coherent. Bester's novel was able to take its first definitive steps towards a genuine production when the rights were purchased by German producer Bernd Eichinger. Eichinger was the head of Constantine Films, a large European production company that specialized in expensive Hollywood-style movies like The Never-Ending Story and The Name of the Rose. The Star's My Destination was likely going to be the biggest film the company had ever produced up to that point. It must have seemed like the time was growing ripe for this type of story. The 90s were proving to be a receptive and pioneering era for large-scale sci-fi. Digital effects were opening up all new possibilities. Movies like Terminator 2 and Independence Day were doing record-breaking business. The decade featured some of the darkest, most visually extravagant, and thematically daring studio science fiction in recent memory. The genre appeared to be moving into something like a new golden age, but it would turn out to be too short-lived for The Star's My Destination to earn a place in its roster. To prepare for the difficult process of raising financing for such a large-scale production, Bernd Eichinger decided to first develop some visual material. He hired comic book artist Neil Adams to create some concept art that would help to flesh out a solid visualization of Bester's world. Adams submitted 25 drawings and claims his designs turned out to be quite similar to the cityscapes that later showed up in Luc Besson's The Fifth Element. Adams says in his interviews with author David Hughes that he even did some story consultation on the script. Bester originally wrote The Star's My Destination as a 4-part serial for a magazine, so the story, by nature, was episodic in structure, and this was proving difficult to adapt into a traditional 3-act screenplay. Adams apparently gave some advice to the development team that allowed them to work out some of the structural problems they were facing. Around 1996, the film appeared to have found its director, Paul W.S. Anderson, a young British talent who had just directed the first live-action adaptation of the Mortal Kombat video games. Anderson's film had been produced relatively cheaply and was critically panned, yet it turned out to be a visually impressive financial hit. Anderson may not be the most respected filmmaker these days, but he certainly wasn't lacking in passion. In a 1995 interview, he called the story a classic Shakespearean tale, and said he wanted his adaptation to be more focused on character than special effects. Working from a screenplay credited to David Giler and William Wisher, Anderson began storyboarding the film with a projected budget of $50 million. For reasons never explained, the movie did not advance beyond the early stages of pre-production. Anderson moved on to another sci-fi project, Event Horizon, and even after this film's release, he was still said to be attached to The Star's My Destination. Nothing happened with it, so Anderson next directed Soldier, a movie that was noted as bearing a general thematic resemblance to Bester's novel. Kurt Russell plays a brutal and impassive super soldier who starts to develop a capacity for empathy after being abandoned on an enemy planet and growing emotionally connected to its inhabitants. It was an expensive box office flop, and Anderson's connection to The Star's My Destination appears to have ended around the time of its making. A few years later, he wound up returning to Constantine Films to direct Resident Evil, another project that had spent years cycling through development at the company. While Anderson succeeded in finally bringing that movie to screens in 2002, The Star's My Destination never enjoyed the same breakthrough. Sometime in the 90s, Eichinger signed a distribution deal with 20th Century Fox, presumably securing some financial backing, and hired a new team of writers. Rudy Gaines and John Rice began working on a new draft that made some drastic and controversial changes to the story. Gaines and Rice removed the jaunting elements and added a love story meant to give the protagonist more motivation and sympathy. Foyle is driven to seek vengeance not because of his abandonment, but because the woman he loved died after he was marooned. Fans of the book do not tend to look back on this particular interpretation favorably. However, the script apparently met with strong approval at Constantine and 20th Century Fox. Gaines and Rice say they met with director Betty Thomas, an odd choice considering she was mostly known for making comedies, but Gaines's impression was she didn't actually have much interest. In spite of the support the production was receiving, another director was never found, and again, for reasons never fully explained, the movie stalled and slowly died. In 2006, Universal Pictures bought the rights to the story, and development started over in the new millennium. The project seems to have spent the next few years under the supervision of producer Lorenzo de Bonaventura, who would enjoy enormous success producing semi-sci-fi action franchises like Transformers and G.I. Joe. Based on those credits, it's hard not to infer that he planned to develop Stars as a similar kind of action spectacle. But in all fairness, de Bonaventura also has a reputation for supporting strong directorial talent. He was famously the executive who greenlit The Matrix at Warner Brothers. He fought against studio resistance to release David O. Russell's Three Kings, and he's worked on films as varied as Constantine, John Singleton's Four Brothers, Kim Ji-woon's The Last Stand, and Steven Soderbergh's Side Effects. Whatever direction he intended to take in adapting the book is unknown. We don't even really know how much progress was made during this time, because the production was kept fairly quiet and secretive. De Bonaventura was asked about it at least once in a 2007 interview, and pretty much all he said was that a script was being written and that it was proving difficult to adapt the story. He singled out the ending as an especially challenging problem to overcome. The script problems must have never been solved because there was never another update on the production. No director seemed to have ever been attached, no actors, nothing. The next time The Star Is My Destination was in the news, almost 10 years later, it was in an announcement that the rights to the book had been purchased by another studio. Paramount took control of the property, writer David DiGilio was hired to adapt the story, and Kong Skull Island director Jordan Vogt-Roberts became the first filmmaker attached to the project in nearly 20 years. In 2017, Vogt-Roberts talked about the film in an interview with Collider. He praised the book, spoke enthusiastically about adapting it, and mentioned that it might be made as either a feature film or a limited series. He also floated the name of South Korean auteur Park Chan-wook as another director potentially circling the project. And that's where the whole thing appears to have dried up. Since 2017, there have been no new updates on any potential film adaptation of The Star Is My Destination. Presumably the rights are still with Paramount. If not, no other company or studio appears to have picked up the option. Is the project dead? For now, it looks like it is. But the book maintains a strong following, and I don't doubt that there's still some interest. As exciting as it would have been to see this story adapted as a feature film, the time for that seems to have passed. What seems more likely at this current moment is that the novel could be turned into a series. Several science fiction properties, like Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End and Isaac Asimov's Foundation, both of which famously spent decades in development, were finally brought to screens within the last few years by streaming and television companies. Results have been mixed, but these adaptations have helped to introduce some great stories to new generations of science fiction fans, and the format still has a lot of untapped potential. Who knows? With movies like Dune reviving theatrical interest in the genre, The Star Is My Destination could find itself back in production at any given moment. If it doesn't happen within this current trend, maybe it'll have better luck with the next trend. The book will always be there. All it needs is the right talent to pull it all together.